And today we're chatting about resignation. What are the contributing factors, and what strategies would employers need to attract and retain a very different future employee? Welcome, Sean. Thank you so much for making the time, being with us. We are going to go straight into the presentation, but also please note that we are live on Facebook. So if you do have any colleagues or friends who can't make it to Zoom, but can get us on Facebook, please notify them. And on Zoom, if you've got any questions, you are more than welcome to unmute and ask your question, or you can put it in the chat box. But on Facebook, you can put your comments or your questions in the chat box. Thank you, Sean. I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farah, and thank you to everyone at the Black Management Forum for your kind introduction and for arranging this very interesting series that I'm thrilled to be part of. So what I want to speak about today, and we can have a conversation about it, and I would really like to hear your own experiences as HR professionals or people working in organizations. And that is a phenomenon that's been called the Great Resignation. And the implications of this for the way we think about the world of work, the future of work, and the future of HRM and the practice of HRM. So what do we mean by the Great Resignation? So this term was coined recently during the COVID-19 pandemic and refers to the resignation en masse or on a large scale of workers across a range of sectors, primarily in the United States. And as we'll see later in the presentation, the Great Resignation has assumed a global global characteristics as well, and is not limited just to North America. It's also known as the Big Quit or the Great Reshuffle, and I've seen more recently people saying, will we have the Great Return to work? It's also known as the Great Reset. So it began in early 2021, which coincided with many of the hard lockdowns globally, and especially in the United States. And I think what makes this wave of resignations different from previous sets of resignations is the scale at which it happened, the speed at which it happened, and then the way it transcended beyond the United States into other parts of the world. So if we look at this picture, we can see that based on a survey of workers globally, that 40% of the global workforce is ready to quit. And we can see that the industries feeling it mostly are from retail, hospitality, leisure and travel, manufacturing, technology, and healthcare, which not surprisingly were the sectors most impacted by the pandemic and lockdowns in the pandemic. What's really interesting to me here is that most workers, up to 73% of the sample, want remote work to continue, and well over 50% are tired of feeling burnt out or have experienced some kind of burnout. And the interesting statistic for me here, or the most interesting one, is that 39% want to be their authentic selves at work. And we can have a discussion about what that means, because I think related to this mass scale of resignation or people leaving work and the high turnover are conversations about what does work mean to people. In many of the conversations in human resource management and just management, we often don't really talk about the meaning that people ascribe to their work or the sense of fulfillment. Yes, we talk about job satisfaction and work engagement, But I think what's different here is that we're talking about meaning at a larger, at a more meta level, in the philosophical sense or the existential sense. But we'll talk more about that just now. Initially, the causes of the Great Resignation have been attributed to many things, like people looking for more meaning or higher incomes and so on. But before we get to the actual causes, I think what makes this so significant is that during times of great economic growth, we often do witness people leaving their jobs, right? En masse. And that's because people can often find other jobs. The economy is strong, the economy is growing and so on. And they're able to have much more career mobility across organizations. But I think what makes this a paradox is that during COVID or during the pandemic, and even currently, whilst there's some upturn in economic growth, the economy globally is not as strong as it used to be. But people are still leaving their jobs. Turnover rates are still extremely high, and especially resignation rates. So what does this mean? How do we explain this, this paradox? So high quit rates, as I've said, indicate worker confidence in the ability to get higher paying jobs, which typically coincides with high economic stability and an abundance of people working and low unemployment rates. However, with the pandemic, we've seen the opposite of this, right? We've seen low economic stability, increase in insecurity levels economically and in the labor market, yet labor turnover continued at in very high percentages. So this is the paradox of the Great Resignation. So it could mean that people were leaving and maybe didn't always have other jobs to go to. And I think this fundamentally speaks to the way people are thinking about careers. And I've called this a career rethink. So as many workplaces attempted to bring their employees in person, there was this tension with workers who wanted the freedom of remote work, right? Primarily due to the pandemic, but as we now witness the return to work, we see that there's an overwhelming preference to remain at home and work from, and to continue to work from home. Workers want schedule flexibility as well. Additionally, many workers, especially in younger cohorts or workers that are younger, seek to get a better sense of work-life balance or work-life integration. And with so little known about the long-term impact of COVID on people's health, we're finding that millions of people are also suffering disabilities from long COVID, which is either altering their ability to work or even their desire to work. So when I speak about the Great Resignation and high labor turnover, even if we account for people that were retrenched or fired and turnover in that sense, there's still a large percentage that's anomalous or is an anomaly that accounts for people that resigned, right? So we're not conflating retrenchments that happened during COVID or people that were laid off or as different organizations or sectors shut down. Along with this career rethink, especially amongst millennials and Gen Z workers, is the searching about the meaning of work, right? And what meaning should work give you? What meaning were people getting from their work? And this is especially prevalent in the workers in the 35 to 45 year age group, who were asking these questions maybe for the first time. So what I've written here is we need to ask questions about work and its meaning. Many of these employees that have resigned said they want fuller lives. What does that mean from an HR perspective? And then it raises this big question: what is the purpose of organizations? Is the purpose of work organizations, or one of the purposes, to provide this meaning? And there are people that will say, no, that's not the purpose. The meaning that people want in their lives, in the existential sense, needs to come from other places apart from work. And then there's another cohort of people that will say, yes, work has to be deeply fulfilling, engaging, and provide this meaning. So one of the largest studies, which was done by Adobe to try and understand the Great Resignation, is that millennials and Generation Z workers were more likely to be dissatisfied with their work. In fact, more than half of Gen Z workers reported planning to seek a new job within the next year. The Harvard Business Review, in their own study, found that the cohort between 30 and 45 years old had the greatest increase in resignation rates as well. So we need to do some reflection and thinking about why this age group specifically, what is different about them, especially when it comes to issues of retention and also, I would say, reward. But is it global? So one of the critiques about the Great Resignation debate is that, oh, it's primarily a North American and United States-based phenomenon. But the research is showing that, yes, it certainly began there. And the US, given how large its labor market is, therefore the numbers are proportionally staggering, right? I mean, I've seen estimates that resignation rates were as high as 8.6% in the labor market in the United States. But when we look at Europe as a continent, we see similar trends. It will differ from country to country. So, for example, in Germany, we see large-scale resignations in specific sectors only, and those sectors may differ from European country to may differ in different countries in Europe, but the overall trend is the same. We also seen this in Australia and New Zealand as well. And then when we go further east, so if you look at China, they have framed it differently. So in China, there's very much a culture of overworking or working longer hours than people in the West work. And there's a great deal of status and cultural and social reward attached to that. So the way the Great Resignation has taken place in China is more akin to a social protest movement, which is referred to as Tang Ping, or which means lying flat, where instead of maybe resigning on such a large scale, workers there have decided not to engage in the societal pressures to overwork. So it's because of cultural differences, it's assumed a different form in China, but it definitely does follow similar trends of questioning what is the meaning of work, what are the meaning of organizations, do I want to work more than 40 hours a week, and so on. In India, which also has a massive labor market, we have witnessed large-scale resignations across many sectors of the economy, but most especially in the IT or the information technology sector. In 2021 alone, the attrition rate was over 1 million resignations. So we've seen that in South Asia. So what about South Africa? So South Africa is an interesting case. We're the most unequal country in the world. We have, I think, the highest unemployment, or one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, which recently, I think, was put at officially at about 35%, but we know unofficially the rate is much higher. So in labor markets and countries with such high unemployment rates, how do we explain this phenomenon? Does this idea of the Great Resignation still hold in our context? So according to REM Channel, which did the most extensive survey of staff turnover in South Africa, we have seen about a 16% turnover across all sectors, with 69% of organizations battling to attract talent. Now, whilst the 16% includes retrenchments and layoffs, the resignation rates make up quite a large proportion of that 16%. In fact, the largest that we've seen in South Africa in a while. Their survey also showed that there is a chronic pattern of burnout, toxic workplace culture, and a drop in productivity, which started during the onset of the pandemic. And we kind of still seeing this pattern even now as we are slowly exiting the pandemic and lockdowns and so on. So whilst we're not seeing the same percentages of resignations as we've seen in more affluent countries or countries with more secure labor markets, the trends are definitely here in the South African labor market, but amongst a specific type of worker. So in many companies, a small percentage of workers have a disproportionate impact on financial incomes. So depending on your skill level, for example, in an organization, if you resign or you decide you want to work as a consultant, or you want to relocate, or you don't want to work in that occupation anymore, it has a disproportionate outcome. And that is what we've seen in South Africa, that amongst highly skilled professionals especially, we are seeing this resignation, relocation of people, a reimagination amongst them of what they actually want to do, right? So even resignations amongst a small percentage of a highly skilled workforce can have a profound consequence on the way we think of work, organizations, and the economy. So there are some critiques about the Great Resignation. The first is, well, is it a very privileged movement, meaning that it's only people that are highly skilled, for example, that can decide to resign, that have some kind of social and economic protections that can do this. So this is certainly true to an extent, but we also seen that many of the people that have resigned either did not have a job waiting for them, they didn't necessarily resign to move to alternate employment. So that's quite interesting. There's more recent work that says, well, everyone that kind of resigned without other work during the Great Resignation, will this now become known as the Great Regret? Because there's a school of thought that says we will now witness the Great Return. But it may be a bit too early, but we're not really seeing the data that would support a Great Return as yet. It may still happen. Yeah, and I think the third critique, which I think would make for a very interesting conversation today, is, do we expect too much from work or our organizations or even from HR? So younger people, especially Millennials, Gen Z, are looking for this sense of meaning from their work, which maybe older cohorts of employees don't have, because you go to work to earn a salary, not to achieve any kind of deep, meaningful interaction that's going to add value to your life, and you come home and that's it. So this is the big question, right? Should we expect even some kind of emotional gratification from work? We've seen lots of things emerging, like spirituality in work, and so we can talk about that. And then, how sustainable is the Great Resignation? So how sustainable is it if this continues? Because there are implications for income, how people sustain themselves and their families financially. What does this mean, though, for HR, and what does it mean for managing people? So some of the ways that senior HR managers have responded is, for example, in this one quote, she expects organizations to become more marketized in the future, with younger generations not holding 6 jobs in their lifetime anymore, but 6 jobs at the same time, as workers offer their skills to different companies in different projects. We usually tell, like at UKZN, we'll tell our graduates, by the age of 35, you would have worked, 6 to 9 different jobs. So don't expect to work in the traditional job where you start in an organization at 18 and retire at 60. But now even that is changing, where I think the employees are going to be more entrepreneurial. So if you are an accountant at Unilever, you are going to be able to be an accountant at 5 other organizations. So the idea of permanently being attached to an organization, I think that might shift, or that is shifting. A post-pandemic work organization, I think, also has to move from a generic idea of one size fits all in terms of their HR strategy, right? We're very much going to move away from synchronous organizations of work to asynchronous, meaning that work is going, and the management of work and work is going to be tailored for individuals' preferences and individual circumstances. So for some people, there may be a preference to come into an office. For some people, they want to work virtually, for example. Some people may be more suited to teamwork, whereas some people are better able to manage themselves, for example. So I think we definitely, and we're already witnessing the shift of a one-size-fits-all HR kind of strategy. The office building. What is to become of the office building if people are not returning physically to work in large numbers? So I really like this, this concept or this term of cultural touchstones. So they become cultural touchstones rather than places of everyday work. We will just use them perhaps for meetings, or if you want to meet a customer, or you want to touch base with your team once a month just to see them physically, for example. They will be places that facilitate interpersonal exchange rather than places of everyday work. So I really think it would be quite interesting to see what happens to all these high-rise office buildings. Many of them have been repurposed already to become residential buildings. What does it mean for leadership? So often the idea of having senior managers that lead or having leaders that manage is a given, right, in HR and management studies or management work. But this new world of work and what the Great Resignation shows us is that there's going to be a great need for self-management and self-leadership. And this is a behavioral skill. So when hiring the new employee, hiring for a behavioral skill might trump hiring based on credentials. Because if we can find a way of knowing what the behavioral skill is, or what behavioral skills have been demonstrated by someone, I would much rather hire someone that has demonstrated behavioral skills that will fit into my organization or my workplace than necessarily hire someone with a list of credentials, for example, but no demonstrated behavioral skills like self-management, right? We need workers who are able and willing and motivated to take on responsibility and thrive with self-management. The behavioral skills that are going to be in demand are around agility and resilience. Managing the transition to this new way of functioning in organizations requires 2 measures. So I mentioned behavioral skill and socializing workers in the right way. And this again comes back to a culture of individualized working conditions. And this kind of conflicts directly with generic performance management, for example. So in many organizations, and I'll speak about my organization, we have generic performance management templates. And it doesn't matter whether Sean is working from home or someone else is working at the office, or that that I'm able to excel in certain areas and my colleague is able to excel in other areas. So this is really going to be a struggle, I think, for HR initially, because we're not going to be able to apply these generic performance measures anymore as we move towards more individualized working conditions. Organizations need to know the approximate areas, abilities, behavior, and rules where they cannot and will not compromise. So I'm not suggesting it becomes a completely anarchist organization, where everything goes, there are no rules. What I'm rather suggesting is that you have your sort of lines in the sand, your deal breakers as an organization. It's very much like having deal breakers in a relationship or when dating someone, almost, right? And so those are your deal breakers. You're not willing to compromise on that. And then based on your deal breakers, you then plan flexibility in your organization, right? So you remain quite flexible within these sort of lines in the sand. So it's a tension between rigidity and flexibility. We know from previous research that a lot of work has actually never happened in organizations due to what we call M&Ms, managers and meetings. I think part of the, in the work that I do, there's certainly been a lot of anxiety amongst managers for people to come back to work, even though they have been performing quite well at home. And I think part of that anxiety amongst managers is there still a need for me then? Or how do I manage remotely? And there's great safety in having people together collectively in a physical workplace that you then manage. Obviously, this depends on sector to sector and the type of work. Some work has to be done physically and collectively in the same physical space. And these are not necessarily bad managers, but I think it's pointing towards some anxiety around identity of managers and the future of work, because we often speak about the future of work or changing work when it comes to employees, but we forget that it's a profound change for people at management level as well. So I spoke about asynchronous work, and I think asynchronous work should enable a win-win situation for workers and organizations alike. I think we would, there's definitely a shift towards measuring the output rather than being invested in the process. I think research on virtual teams clearly shows that both virtual and non-virtual teams always perform better with more role clarity, task clarity, structure, and handbook first policies, but that all of these are of particular importance for the functioning of virtual teams. The pandemic has also shown that companies that have focused on recruiting highly trustworthy, highly committed, and performance-oriented individuals found the transition to more flexible and future-orientated work much easier. And in our last conversation, which we did, or seminar that we had last week, I think Farah mentioned it as well, that the role of the HR manager is almost shifting and becoming more psychology-based. It's a type, you now have to be an expert, not just on labor relations and so on, but I think the future HR manager is going to have to have a great deal of a great psychology skill set in terms of being able to assess behavioral skill, for example, things like commitment, are employees able to self-manage, and so on. So I want to end off by posing this question. Are we really talking about a great resignation here? Or does the Great Resignation simply describe what's happening? But at a larger level, are we not talking about something that I've called the Great Rethink of work, management, and organizations? So I want to leave it there because I think this is a very rich conversation to have based on the people that are here and that are watching, because I'd be quite curious to hear what's happening in your own workplaces, and also to hear some critique about this idea of the Great Resignation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. for, I've actually made so many notes, but I'm going to open it up. Lucky, Sintlobile, if you want to come in with any comments, or if you have a question for Prof.
Hey, morning all. Morning, Prof.
Good morning.
No, thanks again, man. I'm just I'm trying to digest, and because this what you've just touched on are real issues that we confronted with, especially in this day and age. I want to say, you know, being in the manufacturing sector myself, one thing that I've noticed is the pandemic has amplified or brought to the fore leadership, I would say, styles that were prevalent in any organization. And I'm saying this in building up to a resilience topic that we spoke about previously. In organizations that had espoused, I would say, styles that talk mainly towards management techniques, you know, targets, numbers that need to be achieved, because guys, the pandemic brought the production down. We need to catch up. What I have seen, organizations that were like that, pandemic basically amplified those styles by virtue of, because those organizations found themselves in the back foot by virtue of the orders that needed to be met. So the people that were in leadership positions kind of put pressure to catch up using objective measures and all sorts of systems and SOPs to catch up. Versus organizations that espouse leadership skills that have to do with engagement and people-based and sympathy and all that. So organizations like that, when I compare the two, like I'll put mine towards the latter that I'm working for. What I've seen, the resignations or labor turnover was not as bad as those that has espoused techniques for production and all that, because people felt pressure and they were measured on a standard. And there was so much because of the backlog of orders that needed to be met. So when I compare the two, like similar industries that I'm in terms of manufacturing, I have seen organizations like mine manage to retain, I mean, turnover is not so as bad as others, that over the past, I'll say 8 months, some organizations were seeing on average 4 resignations a month. And when I compare with those like mine, there was 1 resignation every 2nd month. So I agree with you. And you made a brilliant point on the slide that is titled Navigating the Great Resignation. There's a 3rd bullet point there. Self-leadership will gradually replace leadership. How I wish you could have made that in bold and put in red and purple. Because, you know, I saw something, and I'm going to talk about myself. During the pandemic, because there was this work arrangement, some people work from home, some here and all that. So I saw a need for high level of responsibility. Now that I'm by myself, I don't have the CEO behind me or whatever, and I'm home, and so it just kind of made me realize that now I have to manage better. And managing better means managing the expectations from me whilst in this new arrangement. My divisions still have to meet the obligations. And I got people that are working from home, which is a new arrangement. I myself am home. And that actually even said, okay, besides just this new way, what about your leadership styles as well and how you manage yourself? So what basically was amplified of that scenario was, Lucky, your self-leadership, there's a need to start now looking into that seriously, so that you can even guide the people to adjust as well. So I'm agreeing with you fully. And I realized the importance of soft issues. You know, soft issues, I'm talking about when you work from home. For instance, there's a dilemma. I might just well be upfront. My dilemma is Lucky. Now that we're taking the direction where there's a likelihood of the work pattern or the way of working is going to change, given what we learned during the pandemic, it's going to be difficult. My dilemma is people like myself who work through people, who read the non-verbal clues when we have a personal engagement. So it's going to be difficult for me to basically operate optimally like that if someone is on the other side, we're meeting virtually, because some of these soft issues, you can't read them. And those are key in terms of boosting morale, because, or maybe trying to reach out by virtue of the non-verbal language that you read when you're having a one-on-one. So that is my dilemma. So going forward, if this is the way, if my organization in the manufacturing adopt that, people like myself who believe in this leadership style of engaging and all that, man, it's going to be difficult. But that's a nice problem to have, because what is that about myself that I need to adjust to keep abreast? So to round my story short, I'm saying, look, I agree with you. The organizations that have managed to stick to the old ways of managing, not leading, found themselves with a high labor turnover. And one last point I want to just add there, few months ago when ESCOM, I remember we almost got to stage 4 or something like that. I remember there was somebody saying there's a phenomenon that is happening at ESCOM. Majority of senior people are resigning without jobs. That says something. If I'm resigning and I don't have a job. So the questions that came to my mind was, I'm more interested on the leadership skills espoused in that environment, and one can draw correlations basically out of that. If does it resonate with this thing that I'm saying now about the leadership pandemic brought about this amplification of leadership skills that are espoused at ESCOM. So it's a subject for another day. It's just curiosity out of me to say, if people resign without jobs, is indicative of the environment of leadership or culture that is prevailing there. What are they running away from, basically? So those are some of the questions that came through my mind when I heard it. And when we discussing this thing today about the great turnover or the great resignation, I think there is somehow that correlation in terms of the leadership styles espoused. And hence my point about the self-leadership being gradually one thing that's going to replace the normal leadership that we are accustomed to. But thanks, man. I enjoy it, and I enjoy all your things so far.
Prof, you want to respond?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all your comments. I've made notes, because I think you're bringing experience from, the real world, from the field. I think this idea of self-leadership is very important, because you're speaking from an organizational perspective, from a personal perspective. And I work at a university where we train students in HR and IR, but the idea of leadership that we present or that we teach is very much how to lead others, right? So, whether it's servant leadership or all the different kinds of leadership, and self-leadership, we call it self-management rather, which I think is very different from self-leadership. And we kind of expect people or students to absorb that from managing their assignments and their presentations and their attendance, but it's never explicitly taught, or it's never explicitly explained. And I think this is a problem because we don't just expect people to self-manage, we expect people now to self-lead. And I mean, from my own experience, I really think this is something that's lacking in our curriculum. Some people would say you can't teach that. But I believe that what we've seen with working from home, for example, is the tremendous need for people that have no idea of how to manage the working from home. People will say, oh, it's common sense, you just manage your time in this, but it's not. And evidence for that is just the popularity of, we ran a webinar series on working from home. And we've had organizations that are multinational organizations to much smaller organizations wanting us to do that work simply because it has traditionally been brushed off as you said, soft skills, right? But I think from everything you've said, and that these soft skills are now becoming the thing that makes successful organizations successful. And it's quite interesting what you mentioned as well, that it's difficult to read, to do a lot of the soft work virtually. And we know, that like on Zoom, for example, you can't see body language. We often feel more fatigued after a 1 hour Zoom meeting than you would after a 1 hour in-person meeting, because in as much as things are happening in real time, there is a delay, even if it's not, even if it's a microsecond, but our brains are not wired to only interact virtually. So yeah, really, and agility and resilience, those are going to be key factors. So I really appreciate your comments as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. So thanks, Lucky. So, you mentioned two things, and the one thing that stood out for me was when you said that they want to be their authentic self. So for me, the minute you said that, the thing that came to mind for me, Prof, was, is there a problem then in diversity and inclusion in organizations? Because if I don't feel included in things, what I'm bringing forward is not truly authentically me. I'm bringing forward portions and bits and pieces from time to time that I'm required to bring because I'm excluded from certain things. Now, I mean, inclusivity could range from a whole lot of things. And I mean, I sometimes say things just like asking somebody for an office lunch, their dietary requirements. If you don't ask somebody that, it means that you lack that aspect in terms of leadership, of inclusivity. You've just assumed that everybody is meat eaters. You've just assumed that everybody, because now we've got halal, we've got vegan, we've got vegetarian, just to give you an example. So is maybe that not something, and I mean, I doubt if it would have come out in any of the research, and together with that, the meaning of work versus, and I actually wrote this, Lucky, as the thing was going on, because if you don't find meaning in the work, it means somewhere in the culture of the organization, they missed something. And organizations spend a lot of money on these outside consultant firms to come in and spend weeks taking you through the culture and reinventing the culture of the organization so that everybody's on the same page. But if that is also happening, and then you're still not finding meaning in what you're doing and where you are, then I think there's a lot of work that companies need to still be doing in terms of the diversity and inclusion and re-looking the culture of organizations. I mean, that's just me, Prof.
Yeah, I mean, I was also surprised by that finding about the expectation almost of bringing that amongst younger workers, that their authentic selves were not being recognized, or that they felt they had to edit who they were and present in a different way at work. Now, we all do it, right? In some way or the other, we perform a different identity at work that than we maybe present at home or amongst friends or family or in other environments. We sometimes code switch. So if you're speaking to someone in the same culture or race or gender, you may speak differently and so on. So this was quite surprising, because the amount of work that's been done on diversity and inclusion training, both in the West and in South Africa, is enormous. But it speaks to the problem that you're raising, that has it been successful if this is still emerging as a significant issue. I think what's interesting is that the people that the workers that mentioned it are very young. And I think there's something with identity politics amongst young workers, something that's happening there that maybe older workers it's not as important to older workers. So even if you just look at the sexuality spectrum, right? People are now, not just LGBT or gay and lesbian workers. They're non-binary. There's a whole trans debate and so on. So that could be one part of it, where organizations would traditionally just treat diversity in terms of gender and race. But also in terms of gender and race, there seem to be, despite great legislation, equity policies, diversity training, people are still not comfortable to, to be at work as who they are. And that certainly was a big surprise, and that people are willing to resign or leave their work. And I think for me, that was shocking. So I think pre-pandemic, people may not necessarily have left, but that something happened where this is now becoming an issue that you're willing to sacrifice income or job security for. So yeah, that is something that I think was unexpected.
So two things then, Prof. So then we go back to if I can call it, the new kind of HR practitioner would then need to maybe have a little bit more skill.
Absolutely.
In identifying some of these things before it gets to that stage. With
the
things.
And I think this goes back to what Lucky was saying as well, that HR has very much been seen as an operational kind of profession, right? Measuring, quantitative, it's all about measurable outputs and so on. And HR professionals are seen as sort of driving those processes. Yes, they may do diversity, they may do some strategic HR, and so on. But the conversation we are having now seems to suggest that we need an HR professional that is highly skilled. I don't want to call the soft skills, but in understanding at a deeper level issues of diversity, inclusivity, behavioral issues, some of these things that we label soft skills, that maybe we are not doing at tertiary institutions. Maybe it needs a re-examination of the curriculum. I think it also speaks to a need for mentoring and coaching, for example, because there's only so much that can be done at an education institution, right? Because yeah, and then, how do you teach these things as well that often only come with a lot of experience?
So
So
on your
true.
one slide, on your slide, that critique slide, Prof, your point number 3, what can you just give me that point number 3 again?
Let me check. Do you remember what it was?
No, I can't. I just
Okay,
wrote.
I'll call it up. Is it the critique?
Yes. Yeah. Point number.
Do we expect too much? Oh, yes. You raised that question. So this issue of meaning and work, I think what the pandemic did is it raised the big questions, right, for people. I mean, people were dying in numbers that we haven't, seen before. I think I said to you that I think I knew like about 29 people that died, colleagues and, friends and so on. And so it raises these big issues beyond, what is the purpose of the organization? So the purpose of the organization may be to make rivets, for example, right? But people want to know, well, what is the meaning of making rivets or hammers or tools? And I think organizations are not asking the big question. We are making these tools to allow these other big things to happen, for example. So the purpose of the university, at a very micro level is, we produce graduates. But that can't be our purpose. Our purpose has to be something larger, around transforming the world. And I think that does come down to organizational culture. But I think the meaning that people want from their work here is more than just, I did a good job, but it's almost a larger existential meaning that they're looking for. And I've heard HR people say to me, and I'm sympathetic to this view, that for that kind of meaning, maybe workplaces are not equipped or even shouldn't provide that meaning. I don't know. I don't have a strong view on this. But I do think if you're going to work every day and you're finding that work not meaningful, then that is a problem. And so I think there's a psychological aspect here, and maybe even a philosophical aspect that HR managers have not really been involved with, right? So if you did well on your performance management, for example, that was seen as good enough, and you would be happy and joyful. But that's not good enough anymore. People are looking for, I think, a deeper sense of, it's almost the question, what is the meaning of life? And we can discuss whether, it's fair to have organizations answer that question.
And it's strange that you say that, because now that you've given some insight on that, because I wrote down here as my last point that I think you coming in to say, is it a great resignation or is it the great rethink? And I honestly think if we look through this presentation and some of the results from the research, I think it's really a great rethink. I think a lot of people used COVID to say, well, wait, hang on, I need to reevaluate, I need to rethink my life and my life's purpose. Because I don't have my I don't have my authentic self on display in the workplace. I don't really have the meaning of work any longer. I don't feel a part of anything here, and that is why I think there's also such a huge percentage that have resigned without knowing where they're going to work.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think about my parents, for example, my parents' generation. They would never have raised this issue of, my work is not meaningful, or I'm not able to bring my authentic self to work. I mean, I think if I tell them that, I'd probably still, at my age, get a slap. But, but these are deep, meaningful questions for the younger people.
They would have actually said, you must be the problem, not the organization.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Let me tell you something interesting that happened last week here. I've got, my division has got 17 machine centers. And we were assessing Q1 performance, Jan to March. And I looked at the two extremes, one machine center that did well and one that didn't do so well. And what was interesting was the common themes about them was they both have employees who are younger than 30, these two machine centers. Not even 100% of employees they are below. I think they're between 22 and 27. And the one common denominator about them was the shift or the team leaders on those machine centers are in their 40s. And both team leaders have been through leadership development programs or whatever that our company organized over the past few years. And then I'm saying to myself, but why you have similar machine centers, similar employees, similar leadership, but this one is doing so bad and this one's so good? You know, one thing that came, what we observed, because we called all the two machine centers, all the employees and the team leaders, and we're having a conversation. So what we picked up was these employees or these young guys or operators, let me call it, they're all operators. The one thing in common that they have, they love IT stories, check their cell phones, and half the time they're on their cell phones. Now, so the one team leader, so what they'll do, let's say there's a breakdown or there's something wrong with the quality. So the usual response would be open up the standard operating procedure, let it guide you in terms of problem solving and that. So these guys in one machine, they do that because the leader is enforcing that. On the other machine center that is doing well, the shift leader or team leader has allowed them to use technology to problem solve than to quickly default to the SOP to look at this thing and follow the steps that are there. So flexibility on this one is quite high because the leader allows that. Whereas on the other side is you follow these steps, it didn't work, then escalate higher. So the guys, there's no flexibility and all that. So that's one that came to the fore. So I then realized again, this guy that is doing so well to be flexible and all that, he gives himself time to sit with them. He doesn't just, when he finds them on the cell phones, he's not quick to apply the standard or discipline and all that. He tries to understand why that. And the guys will tell him, look, this is what I'm trying to see. I'm trying to look at the machine capability. What can happen if we go faster? So this is what I found. So that information empowered the team leader even further to understand how best we can improve performance by just being flexible and allowing them to use these things. They are bending the rules slightly if you can look at it, but the consequence, but the impact of that has been positive in terms of the team leaders' development and the teams as well as performance. So the point I'm trying to get to is, look, these young guys below 30 with this so much keen interest on this IT things and all that. If you're smart, you can channel that. That's what I learned from the discussion. If you're smart, you can channel that to something that will benefit them and you and the organization. Than where there's rigidity, there's no flexibility. So we saw many negatives than that. So I was having a discussion with the HR yesterday to say, guys, let's see how we can open up the scope of this leadership training that people are subjected to. Because when I look at the scope, it's more theories. Leadership exists, these are types of leadership, and there was nothing practical talking to me directly. It was just on a general sense. So I agree with you, Farah. Definitely flexibility and agility and being open-minded. That's what I see works for those people that are not rigid.
Absolutely.
Especially the leadership level.
Absolutely, Lucky. And you know, it's a funny thing that you bring that up because, Prof, even on my SMME workshops and my sessions, when we talk about the teams and how you employ, you know, I've said this and I'll continue saying it, because if you're going to employ young people, your environment has got to be so charged. You know, the technology you're using can't be slow. You know, they'll get bored. They will
Exactly.
honestly get bored. And they leave within 3 months because there's nothing, you know, they can literally survive with the phone in their hands and they can get a lot done. Believe it or not, they can get a
it's
lot done.
astonishing. And the 3 month, leaving after 3 months there's also no organizational loyalty anymore, you know, which was
Yes.
maybe the more traditional employee. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
And you know, you may even hear some of them say, no, I moved. It was either the same money or maybe even a little less, but it was just so energized. You know, the environment was energized and it spoke to them. You know, it spoke to them. So that's a very thing. But the other thing, and I know before we close, Prof, because I know you need to go, don't you think that those 30 to 45, and I'm talking those coming closer to the 45 range, is it not perhaps starting to look at the time is coming? Do we need to prepare for you know, the end of work life and things like that? So there's this great movement of saying we need to get better jobs, better paying jobs, more opportunity to move up the ladder quicker. When you start getting to that age of like 45 into that.
So I think part of it might be around what we would conventionally think of midlife crisis. But part of it, you know, when you're asking those big questions and you like, I don't know, 45 or even your early 40s, or even like 38 or 35, you're like, oh, well, what we've seen in the last 2 years is that life is short. I always wanted to start a cupcake business. I'm going to start it now, you know. So whereas that would have, so that sort of replaced the security, stability, stay till 60, 65, and so on. How sustainable that is, I don't know. But so I think the reasons for leaving would be quite different amongst that age group and then say maybe those in their 20s, for example. Farah, you're still muted.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. It's been another very enlightening, engaging session. And I think, you know, these kind of conversations we could have for much longer. And I'm looking forward to the next one in May. And I think we're talking about HR as a career choice. We're talking about HR as a career choice. And I think that will be interesting. And I think it'll bring all of this together in that third part of
and I'm hoping to have maybe 1 or 2 graduates as well, so we can hear their voice.
That would be a good idea.
Yes. Yeah. No, thank you so much, Prof, once again. Thank you, Lucky. Do you have any last minute? I know Prof needs to duck. Do you have anything last minute?
I'll reserve it for next one, my dear. I've got a couple, not just one, but I'll reserve for next one.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can also help some of the graduates there on the next one. So, Prof, once again, thank you so much for making the time. It's always such a pleasure, and for your support of the BMF in KZN.
You're welcome, and I can't wait to get all our students engaged, and they're definitely going to watch the recording. And thank you very much, and to the BMF as well. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Prof. So before we sign off, I just in the chat, Bongiwe has put her information there on the chat. So we also are live on Facebook, but you can also go there. We'll post the link on Facebook as well for anybody who you want to share it with. And also, just as a reminder, we've got 2 programs that we are hosting, and that's for anybody in KZN. You need not be a member. It's our mentorship circle, and that allows you to have a mentor that will help you start your business, grow your business. And also, if you're a manager or a leader and you're looking for an hour of mentorship, we've got a host of coaches just waiting to help you along your journey. So once again, Prof, thank you. Thank you for all the attendance. Lucky, thank you so much. And we will see you all next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sure. Cheers.